Ambassador Richard Burt negotiated the First START Treaty, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, with the Soviet Union. That was years ago. There's now a new start, but according to some, including yourself, progress has stalled. Thank you for sitting down with us. I want to begin with that. START was signed, the new START was signed in April 2010. You yourself have said that progress has stalled. How much does U.S. plans to install missile defense there and Russia's opposition to it have to do with that?
Well, I think it's a factor. I mean, there are a number of reasons that I think the process has slowed down. I mean, this has been a political year, obviously. New presidency and new old presidency in Russia, presidential elections in the United States. I think the Russians are having second thoughts about relying less on nuclear weapons, which is certainly part of American policy. But the disagreement on missile defense is also an important factor.
Russia specifically has said of late, especially, that it's concerned about new modifications of SM-3 Inceptor missiles, which I understand are believed or are fast enough to shoot down Russian missiles in ascent. So to the Russian, despite elections and despite how important national security platform is for the Russian people and for elections, it seems like it's really up there for the Kremlin, despite the change that we're about to see.
I don't think it's very helpful to talk about all these technical intricacies. I think there is a real technical difference over the capabilities, not of the existing system that NATO is planning to deploy over the next 2 or 3 years. We're really talking about a system that might be deployed after 2020. And it's not even clear, given the fact that the U.S. is going to have to reduce its defense budget simply to meet its fiscal problems at home, whether that new system will ever be deployed. So I think there's time for the United States, Russia, and others to sit down and talk about these issues.
Why do you think the U.S. has failed to convince Russia that, one, the missile defense system would not be directed against them, and two, why can't they give them those guarantees?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and I think it's because not only Russia but the United States are still locked into this bilateral, bipolar Cold War mentality, and it's a problem. Both the United States and Russia have had trouble adjusting to a new multipolar world and dealing with a new range of threats. The problem of nuclear weapons today isn't that the United States is going to attack Russia or Russia is going to attack the United States. The problem with nuclear weapons today is the spread of nuclear weapons, in particular to unstable countries, say, for example, Pakistan, or even that nuclear weapons could fall into the hands of terrorists. And this is a problem where the United States and Russia should work together, rather than looking backwards in the rearview mirror.
I'd like to talk a bit about President-elect Vladimir Putin. Obviously, coming back to the Kremlin, he has experience with this issue. He's openly criticized it and says that it undermines really the trust between the two countries. How do you see him coming back to the Kremlin, playing into to both Russia's foreign policy in that sense and into the disarmament progress?
Well, like I think almost everybody else, I don't have the slightest idea. He can continue with the kind of Cold War rhetoric that he ramped up during the election campaign, and blame the United States for all kinds of nefarious activities behind the scenes, or he can take a more practical course. He can be more the Putin in the early part of his tenure, in the early part of the 2000, 2001, 2002, and seek practical solutions. I think there is a practical solution to this anti-missile issue. But as long as that both sides kind of treat this as more of a theological issue, they won't make headways.
What about President Obama? How does that play into his re-election campaign?
The anti-missile issue is not a big issue in the United States. I mean, the Iran issue certainly is. And but even so, it's really domestic economics. But Obama is in a tough political spot because I think while he would like to find an arms control solution to this problem and solve it, he already backed away from the Bush plan to deploy these more capable missiles in Poland and the radar in the Czech Republic. I think that he's got a U.S. Senate with some Republicans that are making it difficult, for him to make, I think, give him the room for maneuver that he needs to find a practical solution with Vladimir Putin.
And also a budget, which you mentioned earlier.
Right. You know, that's a key issue here. Again, we're talking about capabilities that are more than a decade out, that actually the uniformed military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, are not great advocates of missile defense. And so it would be a tragic irony if the United States and Russia are unable to move ahead on arms control based on a system that will never be deployed in the first place.
What about the reset? Will we have to start over, do you think? Has it failed?
No, I don't think the reset has failed at all. In fact, on some issues like Afghanistan, there's a lot of cooperation. I think on fighting drugs, for example. I even think in areas like Syria, where 2 or 3 weeks ago there was a lot of angry rhetoric about the two sides' positions. I think even on Syria, the two sides are becoming a little more pragmatic and moving towards each other. So there are a lot of strategic reasons for the United States and Russia to work together. In particular, there are two big countries that face big problems, challenges, both domestic and international. And on most of those issues, I think they're similarly aligned.
You mentioned earlier that for Americans and in an election year, missile defense is not a big issue, but Iran is. Why? What's the threat?
Well, you got to remember that in the United States, we've been at war in the Middle East for over 10 years. There's concern also, of course, that Iran, if it had nuclear weapons, could threaten Israel, who's seen as an important ally. And there's also the threat that if Iran acquired nuclear weapons, other countries, in the region, like Turkey or Egypt, might also acquire nuclear weapons. So it's the overall instability with the Arab awakening, the nuclearization of Iran, and the United States' involvement in that region, which is a matter of concern.
A lot of critics, though, would say that, one, there's not any proof that Iran has a nuclear weapon or is developing a nuclear weapon, and also that there's a risk of repeating weapons of mass destruction mistake made with Iraq, which, like you said, left.
Yeah, it was, and it wasn't just a mistake. I mean, I think that clearly, in retrospect, the information to suggest that Iraq was building a nuclear weapon was a flaw. But no, I mean, the problem with Iran, no one is claiming now that I'm aware of that they have a nuclear weapon. The question is how close are they to a nuclear weapon? And I think people honestly disagree on that question. But I think there's a general agreement, including agreement between Moscow and Washington, that if Iran were to acquire a nuclear weapons capability, that would not be a stabilizing development for the region. You can disagree on what the consequences might be and how serious they would be, but nobody would, I think, like to live in a crowded live in or near a crowded nuclear region where Iran, maybe Egypt, maybe Turkey, Israel already possesses a nuclear weapons capability. That is not a very happy future.
What do you say to critics who say, why can Israel have nuclear weapons and Iran not? They're both in the region.
It's not a question of saying Israel can have nuclear weapons and Iran not. It's a question of doing what we would like to do, which is move towards global zero. And under global zero, Israel wouldn't have nuclear weapons either. I happen to think that a nuclear weapons-free zone, which would include both Israel and Iran, where neither country would have nuclear weapons, would be much better than the current situation.
You mentioned earlier rhetoric building around Iran and media reports suggesting that Israel may in fact strike Iran. Of course, it's all speculation. No one can guess what will happen. But if that was to happen and the infrastructure in Iran was destroyed, would that lessen the threat somehow?
Well, I'm not sure the Israelis could actually destroy the Iranian nuclear infrastructure. It's very dispersed. Some of it is hardened, some of it's underground. So they might be able to set it back, but I don't think they could destroy it. And the consequences would be very unpredictable. I would assume that the Iranians would retaliate in one way or another, and the prospects for a regional conflict would grow. So it would be a very destabilizing step in my view. I'm not a proponent of an Israeli strike against Iran.
Russia and the U.S. have very different approaches to Iran. Is there any way that they could possibly work together to move forward on it? It started to happen back with six parties talks, but they stalled again. Is that an option, do you think?
No, I think they're working together now. Next month, the so-called P5, the permanent members of the Security Council, together with Germany, P5+1, and Cathy Ashton from the European Union, will be sitting down with the Iranians to talk about a negotiated solution, which would potentially permit the Iranians to engage in peaceful uses of nuclear energy while constraining their options for developing and deploying nuclear weapons. So, this is a promising development. Diplomacy in the past has not succeeded with the Iranians. I think the Iranians are very sophisticated, tough negotiators. But this is an area where the United States and Russia are working together.
In terms of Iran and missile defense and all of the issues we touched on, realistically, you seem to be a bit of an optimist, which is a good thing. But realistically, how do you see all of these issues playing out in terms of the Global Zero Initiative within the next couple of years?
Well, I think they're absolutely critical. You have to be an optimist, but I think the big problem is correctly you correctly identified it is Iran. If we fail to head off the acquisition by Iran of nuclear weapons, I think that is going to open the door to several other countries acquiring nuclear weapons. I think maybe 3 or 4 other countries in the region could acquire nuclear weapons. That would not only be very destabilizing, but it's the danger in the 21st century is the danger of the spread of nuclear weapons, not the buildup by the United States and Russia.
Do you think that Global Zero is possible in the 21st century?
It's certainly possible in the 21st century. The question is whether it's possible in the next 20 years.
All right. Ambassador Richard Burt, thank you very much for being with us on RT.